Tom Bradley had been working cattle since before he could properly ride a horse. His grandfather bought the ranch back in 1962, and Tom grew up watching his father turn it into something special. Now at 45, with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin, he was doing the same thing his father and grandfather did: raising cattle, fixing fences, and living the kind of life that most people only saw in movies. The ranch sat on 200 acres of good Texas land. Rolling hills, decent grass, and a spring-fed creek that never ran dry, even in the worst droughts. The cattle knew the land as well as Tom did. Every morning, he'd wake up before sunrise, brew coffee so strong it could wake the dead, and head out to check on his herd. It was simple work, honest work, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. Getting to the ranch meant driving down a long dirt road that connected to the highway about 2 miles out. Tom's grandfather built that road himself, grading it with an old bulldozer and laying gravel with his own 2 hands. It wasn't fancy, but it did the job. Over the years, a few neighbors had asked permission to use it, and Tom's family always said yes. That's just how things worked out in the country. You help your neighbors, and they helped you. But things started changing about 3 years ago. A big development company bought up the land next to Tom's ranch. At first, he didn't think much of it. Land changed hands all the time. He figured maybe another rancher was expanding or someone wanted to build a nice house away from town. He was wrong about that. Within 6 months, construction crews swarmed the area like ants. Bulldozers, cement trucks, framing crews working dawn to dusk. They were building what the fancy signs called Prairie View Estates. It was going to be a luxury community with over 100 homes, each one looking pretty much like the next. Big houses with perfect lawns, 3-car garages, and HOA rules thicker than a phone book. Tom watched it all happen from his porch. Every evening he'd sit there with his dog Rex, drinking sweet tea and wondering what it would be like having that many neighbors. The development was using the same road his grandfather built. The construction trucks tore it up pretty bad, but Tom didn't complain. Once the building was done, he figured things would settle down. The houses sold fast. Young families, retired couples, people who worked in the city but wanted to feel like they lived in the country. They had fancy cars and perfectly trimmed hedges. Some of them waved when they drove past Tom's ranch. Most didn't. They were in their own world and Tom was in his. Then the homeowners association got organized. Every development like that has one. Tom knew that much. They collect dues, make rules about what color you can paint your mailbox, that sort of thing. He'd heard stories about HOAs from his friend Pete, who lived in a neighborhood in town. Pete couldn't even plant tomatoes in his front yard without getting a nasty letter. Tom always felt grateful he didn't have to deal with that nonsense. The HOA at Prairie View Estates elected a board of directors, and heading that board was a woman named Beverly Patterson. She was a retired real estate attorney who moved from Dallas. Sharp as a tack, always dressed like she was heading to a business meeting, and she had opinions about everything. Tom met her once at the feed store in town. She introduced herself, mentioned something about property values and community standards, and Tom nodded politely while thinking about the fence he needed to repair. For the first year, everything was fine. The construction mess got cleaned up. The families settled into their new homes. The road got used more than before, but it was still holding up okay. Tom kept doing what he always did, taking care of his cattle, maintaining his property, living his life. Then one Tuesday in March, Tom drove into town to pick up some supplies and check on a bull he was thinking about buying. The trip took most of the day. By the time he headed back to the ranch, the sun was starting to set. He had his truck loaded with feed sacks, fence posts, and a new water pump for the north pasture. He turned onto the road leading to his ranch, the same road he'd driven thousands of times. But something was different. Up ahead, where the road curved past the entrance to Prairie View Estates, he saw something that made him hit the brakes. There was a gate. A big, fancy automatic gate with stone pillars on either side and a call box. It stretched completely across the road, blocking his way home. Tom sat there in his truck, staring at that gate like it was a spaceship that just landed. His heart started pounding. He put the truck in park and got out, walking up to the gate with Rex following behind him. There was a keypad on the call box and a sign that read, Prairie View Estates, private community, residents only. He tried the gate. Locked solid. He looked for a way around it. The HOA had put up nice landscaping on both sides, bush and decorative rocks, making it impossible to drive around. Tom pulled out his phone and called the number on the call box. It rang 4 times before someone answered. Prairie View Estates Security, how can I help you? The voice sounded bored. Yeah, I need to get through this gate, Tom said, trying to keep his voice calm. I live just past your development. This road goes to my ranch. Are you a resident, sir? No, I'm not a resident. I'm a rancher. My property is at the end of this road. I've been using this road my whole life. There was a pause. Let me transfer you to the HOA office. Tom waited, listening to hold music that sounded like it belonged in an elevator. Finally, another voice came on the line. This one belonged to Beverly Patterson. This is Beverly. I understand you're having an issue with our new security gate? Beverly, it's Tom Bradley. From the ranch. Your gate is blocking the road to my property. I need to get home. Oh, Tom, yes. She sounded like she was talking to a child who didn't understand something simple. The gate was installed for security purposes. We had a board meeting about it last month. The community voted, and we decided it was necessary for property values and safety. That's fine for your community, Tom said, feeling his jaw tighten. But I need access. My ranch is past your development. Well, we can certainly give you a gate code, but you'll need to pay the monthly HOA assessment like everyone else. It's $350 a month. That covers road maintenance, security, and community amenities. Tom couldn't believe what he was hearing. Road maintenance? Beverly, my grandfather built this road. My family has been maintaining it for 60 years. That may be, but the community is maintaining it now. If you want access, you need to contribute. Those are the rules. I'm not paying HOA dues for a road my family built. Just open the gate and let me through. I'm afraid I can't do that. If you'd like to discuss this further, you're welcome to attend our next board meeting. It's on the 3rd Thursday of the month. And then she hung up. Tom stood there holding his phone, staring at that gate. The sun had set completely now, and the automatic lights on the stone pillars came on, making the whole thing look even more ridiculous. His cattle were waiting to be fed. His dog needed dinner. He had a truck full of supplies that needed unloading. And he was locked out of his own property by a homeowners association that didn't even exist 3 years ago. He got back in his truck and called his neighbor Pete, explaining the situation. Pete knew a guy who knew a guy, and within an hour, Tom had the phone number of a property attorney named Richard Chun. He left a message explaining what happened, then spent the night at Pete's house. Fuming about Beverly Patterson and her ridiculous gate. Richard Chun called Tom back first thing the next morning. He was a property attorney who had dealt with HOA disputes before, and he didn't sound surprised by Tom's story. They agreed to meet at Richard's office that afternoon. Tom showed up in his work clothes, still dusty from finally getting back to his ranch. Pete had driven him around the long way, through a neighbor's property, adding an extra 45 minutes to the trip. The whole situation felt absurd. Richard's office was neat and organized, with law books lining the walls and a big mahogany desk. He was younger than Tom expected, maybe in his late 30s, wearing glasses and a tie that was loosened at the collar. He shook Tom's hand and gestured to a chair. So, tell me everything, Richard said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. Tom explained the whole situation. The development, the gate, his conversation with Beverly, everything. Richard took notes and asked questions. When did the development start? Had anyone from the HOA ever contacted Tom about the road? Did Tom have any documentation about the road's history? Here's the thing, Richard said when Tom finished. HOAs can be tricky. They have a lot of power within their communities, but that power has limits. The question is whether they have any legal right to that road. My grandfather built it, Tom said. It's been in my family since 1962. Do you have the original property deed? Any surveys? Anything that shows the road's ownership? Tom thought about it. My father kept all the old documents in a safe at the ranch house. Deeds, surveys, all that stuff. I never really looked through it. You need to find those documents, Richard said. Bring everything to me. We need to establish clear ownership of that road. If your family owns it, then the HOA has been using it without permission. That changes everything. Tom spent the next day digging through his father's old safe. It was like looking through a time capsule. Property deeds going back to the original land purchase. Survey maps hand-drawn on yellowing paper. Receipts for everything from barbed wire to bull calves. And there, in a folder marked Road Construction 1962, he found what he needed. The documents were clear. Tom's grandfather, William Bradley, had built the road entirely on Bradley family property. There was a survey map showing the road's path, receipts for gravel and equipment, even photos of his grandfather on that old bulldozer. The road had never been deeded to the county. It had never been made public. It was private property belonging to the Bradley family. Tom brought everything to Richard's office. The attorney spent an hour reviewing the documents, cross-referencing them with current property records on his computer. Finally, he sat back and smiled. Tom, this is better than I hoped. You own that road, the entire thing. The section where the HOA built their gate, that's on your property. They built a gate on someone else's land without permission. Tom felt something like electricity run through him. So what do we do? Well, we have options. We could demand they remove the gate immediately. We could sue for trespassing, or... Richard leaned forward, that smile getting bigger. We could have some fun with this. Over the next week, Richard did his research. He pulled property records, checked easement laws, and reviewed HOA regulations. What he found was interesting. The development company that built Prairie View Estates had assumed the road was public access. They never checked ownership. They just built their community and figured everyone could use the road. The HOA, when it formed, made the same assumption. Richard called Beverly Patterson and requested a meeting. She agreed, probably thinking she could intimidate some small-town lawyer. She showed up to Richard's office with 2 other HOA board members, all of them dressed like they were heading to court. Tom was there too, sitting quietly while Richard did the talking. He laid out the facts, showing them the original documents, the surveys, the proof of ownership. With each piece of evidence, Beverly's face got a little paler. This road belongs to Tom Bradley, Richard said calmly. It always has. Your entire community has been using his private property without permission. The gate you installed? That's on his land. Technically, you're trespassing every time someone drives through. Beverly tried to argue. She brought up something called adverse possession, claiming that if people use property long enough, they can claim ownership. Richard shot that down immediately. The timeline was too short, and Tom's family had given permission for the use, which negated any adverse possession claim. Then she tried implied easement, arguing that the HOA had a right to access because they'd been using the road. Richard explained that implied easements don't work that way, especially when there's clear documentation of ownership. What do you want? Beverly finally asked, her attorney voice cracking just a little. That's up to Tom, Richard said. Tom had been thinking about this all week. Part of him wanted to just demand they take down the gate and leave him alone. But another part of him, the part that had been growing angrier each day, wanted them to understand what they'd done. They'd locked him out of his own property. They'd treated him like he was the problem. They'd done all of this without even asking him. I want that gate gone, Tom said. And I want a formal apology from the HOA board. Beverly looked relieved. Fine, we can do that. We'll have the gate removed this week. I'm not finished, Tom said. You folks made an assumption about that road. You never checked ownership. You just decided it was yours to control, so here's what's going to happen. Until we reach a formal agreement, I'm treating that road exactly like what it is. My private property. What does that mean? One of the other board members asked. Richard pulled out another document. It means Tom is going to start charging for access. It's his road. He can do what he wants with it. The room went quiet. Beverly's face went from pale to red. You can't do that. Actually, he can, Richard said. It's private property. He has every right to control access and charge for usage. But our entire community needs that road. That's the only way in and out. Tom leaned back in his chair. I know, it's frustrating, isn't it? Being blocked from going home. Beverly stood up, her hands shaking. This is extortion. No, Richard said calmly. This is property rights. You built your community assuming you had access to a road you don't own. That was your mistake, not Tom's. The HOA board left that meeting angry and scared. Tom knew they'd probably talk to their own lawyers, try to find a way out, but Richard was confident. The law was clear and the documentation was solid. That night, Tom sat on his porch thinking about what came next. He wasn't trying to destroy the HOA or make life miserable for the families in Prairie View Estates. Most of them were decent people who had no idea about any of this. But Beverly and her board had been arrogant. They'd assumed they could push around a rancher that he'd just accept whatever they decided. His phone rang. It was Richard. Tom, I just got a call from Beverly's attorney. They're not backing down. They're claiming the HOA has a legal right to the road because removing access would be unconscionable. They're threatening to fight this. Tom thought about his grandfather building that road, grading each section by hand. He thought about his father maintaining it for decades, filling potholes and laying fresh gravel. He thought about being locked out of his own ranch by people who'd lived there less than 3 years. Then let's give them something to fight, Tom said. How fast can we set up a toll booth? Richard laughed. Are you serious? Dead serious. If they want to use my road, they can pay for the privilege. Just like they wanted me to pay them. Tom, this is going to cause chaos. I know, Tom said, looking out at his ranch, at the land his family had worked for 3 generations. But they started this. I'm just finishing it. Over the next few days, Richard helped Tom file all the proper paperwork. They posted legal notices on the road declaring it private property. They hired a surveyor to mark the exact boundaries. And they drew up a toll schedule that was, Tom had to admit, pretty steep. $50 per vehicle entry or exit for non-residents. Monthly passes for $500 per household. Commercial vehicles like delivery trucks or garbage collection, $100 per trip. It was revenge, pure and simple. But it was also legal, fair, and exactly what the HOA had tried to do to him. The difference was, Tom actually owned the road. When Beverly found out what was happening, she called Tom directly. She was screaming so loud he had to hold the phone away from his ear. You'll regret this, she said. We'll sue you for everything you have. You're welcome to try, Tom said calmly. But I'd suggest you talk to your lawyer first. Ask them how much it's going to cost to fight a property rights case you can't win. Then ask yourself if it might be easier to just take down that gate and apologize. She hung up on him. Tom smiled and went back to work. His cattle didn't care about HOA disputes. They just needed feeding. The toll booth went up on a Monday morning. Tom hired a local construction crew to install it, and by noon, there was a small building sitting right at the edge of his property, just before the road entered Prairie View Estates territory. It wasn't fancy, just a wooden structure with a window, a credit card reader, and a bright red gate arm that came down across the road. Tom also installed security cameras and motion sensors. If anyone tried to go around the toll booth or damage it, he'd have evidence. Richard had warned him that some people might get angry enough to do something stupid, and Tom wanted to be prepared. The signs were clear and professional. Bradley Family Private Road, established 1962, toll required for all non-owner traffic. Below that, the rate schedule was posted in letters big enough to read from 50 feet away. Tom didn't actually plan to sit in the booth all day. He hired his neighbor's college-age son, Danny, to work shifts. Danny was a good kid studying business at the community college, and he could use the money. Tom paid him $20 an hour to sit there, collect tolls, and deal with angry residents. The first car arrived around 3 in the afternoon. It was a Mercedes SUV driven by a woman Tom had never seen before. She rolled down her window, looking confused. "What's this?" she asked Danny. "Toll booth, ma'am." "This is private property. The fee is $50 for entry and exit, or you can purchase a monthly pass for $500. The woman's confusion turned to anger. This is ridiculous. I live here. I'm not paying a toll to get to my own house. Then you'll need to find another route, ma'am, Danny said politely. There is no other route. This is the only road. I understand your frustration, Danny said, using the script Tom had given him. But this is private property. The owner is within his legal rights to charge for access. The woman sat there for a moment, her face getting red. Then she pulled out her phone and called someone. Tom, watching from his truck parked nearby, could hear her yelling even from a distance. After 5 minutes of arguing with whoever was on the phone, she finally handed Danny her credit card. He ran it through the reader, the gate arm lifted, and she drove through. Still cursing Doc by evening, word had spread through Prairie View Estates. More cars lined up at the toll booth. Some people paid without much fuss, clearly planning to fight about it later. Others argued, threatening and demanded to speak to managers who didn't exist. One guy tried to drive around the booth through the grass, but Tom's security system caught it on camera, and Danny called the sheriff's office. The driver got a citation for trespassing and had to back up. The HOA held an emergency meeting that night. Tom wasn't invited, obviously, but he heard all about it from Pete, whose cousin lived in the development. According to Pete's cousin, the meeting was chaos. Residents were furious, demanding the board fix the situation immediately. Beverly tried to explain the legal complexities, but nobody wanted to hear it. They just wanted to get to their homes without paying $50 each way. Some residents called Tom directly. A few were angry, blaming him for the whole mess. But others were surprisingly sympathetic once they heard his side of the story. They'd had their own run-ins with Beverly and the HOA board. One woman, Linda, called to apologize. I had no idea they'd locked you out of your ranch, she said. That's terrible. I'm sorry this is happening. I appreciate that, Tom said. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about your neighbors. Most of you are fine people. This is about the HOA board making decisions without thinking about how it affects others. They never asked me about that gate. They just put it up. I get it, Linda said. For what it's worth, a lot of us are pretty upset with Beverly right now. She keeps saying you're being unreasonable, but she's the one who caused this mess. By the end of the first week, Tom had collected over $30,000 in toll fees. He didn't need the money, but that wasn't the point. Every dollar represented someone in Prairie View. Estates realizing that actions have consequences, the local newspaper caught wind of the story. A reporter named Chris came out to interview Tom at the ranch. Tom gave him the full story, showing him the original documents, explaining how his grandfather built the road, and describing how the HOA had locked him out of his property. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday edition. Rancher turns tables on HOA with toll road, the headline read. It painted Tom as the underdog standing up to an overreaching homeowners association. The story went viral online. People from all over the country commented, sharing their own HOA horror stories and cheering Tom on. Beverly tried to do damage control, giving her own interview where she claimed Tom was being vindictive and unreasonable. But the court of public opinion wasn't on her side. Even people who lived in HOA communities thought what she'd done was wrong. The attention brought unexpected consequences. National news outlets picked up the story. Tom found himself doing phone interviews with radio stations and cable news shows. He never sought the attention, but he didn't back down from it either. He told the same story every time, calmly explaining the facts. The publicity put pressure on the HOA. Residents were embarrassed to be associated with the controversy. Home sales in the development stopped completely. Nobody wanted to buy a house in a community where they'd have to pay a toll just to get home. Property values started dropping. Beverly called another board meeting, this one to discuss settlement options. But the board was divided. Some members wanted to negotiate with Tom, admit they'd made a mistake, and work out a fair agreement. Others, led by Beverly, wanted to keep fighting, convinced they could win in court. The split came to a head when 3 board members resigned, saying they didn't want to be part of the ongoing disaster. New elections were held, and the residents voted in people who were more interested in solving problems than proving points. The new board president, a retired engineer named Robert, called Tom directly. His approach was completely different from Beverly's. "Tom, I'm Robert. I just got elected to the HOA board and I want to start fresh. What happened to you was wrong. The previous board should have consulted with you before installing that gate. I'd like to sit down and talk about how we can fix this situation in a way that's fair to everyone." Tom appreciated the honesty. "I'm willing to talk, Robert. But I need you to understand something. I'm not trying to destroy your community. I just want to be treated with respect. This road has been in my family for 60 years. The HOA can't just take it over and lock me out." "I completely understand," Robert said. "Can we meet this week?" They met at a neutral location, a coffee shop in town. Robert brought along the HOS attorney, but not Beverly. She'd been effectively sidelined by the new board, though she was still technically a member. "Here's what I'm proposing," Robert said, pulling out a folder. "The HOA pays you for a permanent easement. We remove the gate entirely. You remove the toll booth. The HOA maintains the road but never restricts your access. And we pay for any expenses you've incurred, including legal fees." Tom looked at Richard, who nodded slightly. "How much are you offering for the easement?" Tom asked. "We had the road appraised. Given the property values in our development and the fact that we have no other access, an appraiser suggested the easement is worth between $100,000 and $200,000. We're prepared to offer $150,000. Tom sat back, thinking. That was a lot of money. It would let him upgrade his equipment, maybe expand his herd. It was certainly more than he'd make running the toll booth, even if he kept it going for years. "What about Beverly?" Tom asked. "She started all this." Robert sighed. "Beverly is resigning from the board. The residents have made it clear they've lost confidence in her leadership. Part of the settlement would include a formal apology from the HOA board, which would be read at a community meeting. Beverly would have to be there." Tom looked at Richard again. His attorney gave a slight nod. It was a good deal, fair and reasonable. "There's one more thing," Tom said. "I want the apology to be public. Not just at your community meeting. I want it in writing, signed by the board, acknowledging what happened and admitting the mistake." "Done," Robert said, extending his hand. Tom shook it. "Then we have a deal. But the toll booth stays up until the paperwork is signed and the check clears." "Understood," Robert said. Over the next 2 weeks, lawyers drew up the agreement. It was detailed and specific, covering every possible scenario. The easement would be permanent, giving Prairie View Estates residents legal access to the road forever. But the easement came with conditions. The HOA had to maintain the road at their expense. They could never install another gate or barrier. And they had to give Tom advance notice of any road work or construction that might temporarily block access. The check was delivered on a Friday afternoon. $150,000 made out to Tom Bradley. Richard reviewed all the paperwork one final time, making sure everything was in order. "You did good, Tom," Richard said. "Not many people would have stood up to an HOA like this." "I just wanted respect," Tom said. "That's all I ever wanted." The formal apology was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the HOAS monthly meeting. Tom wasn't looking forward to it, but he'd earned it. And he was going to be there to hear it. The community center at Prairie View Estates was packed on Tuesday night. Every chair was filled, with people standing along the walls and in the doorway. Tom arrived 15 minutes early, wearing his cleanest jeans and a button-down shirt. He brought Pete along for moral support, and Richard came too. Just in case any legal issues came up, the buzz of conversation died down when Tom walked in. Some people stared at him with open hostility. Others nodded respectfully or even smiled. One older gentleman stood up and shook Tom's hand, thanking him for standing up to the board. The community, Tom realized, was split right down the middle. Beverly was already there, sitting in the front row with her arms crossed. She looked smaller somehow, like someone had let the air out of her. She didn't make eye contact with Tom when he walked past to find a seat. Robert called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. He went through the usual business first, approving minutes from the last meeting, discussing upcoming community events, reviewing the budget. Tom could feel the impatience in the room. Everyone knew why they were really here. Finally, Robert cleared his throat and pulled out a piece of paper. We have some important business to address tonight regarding the gate incident and the toll road dispute with Tom Bradley, who many of you know owns the ranch adjacent to our community. The room went completely silent. First, I want to read a formal statement from the HOA board, Robert continued. This statement has been signed by all current board members and will be entered into the official record. He began reading. The Prairie View Estates Homeowners Association acknowledges that serious errors in judgment were made regarding the installation of a security gate on the access road to our community. We failed to properly research the ownership of this road before proceeding with construction. The road in question is, and has always been, private property belonging to the Bradley family, who built and maintained it since 1962. Robert paused, glancing at Beverly before continuing. We further acknowledge that by installing a gate without consulting Tom Bradley, the legal owner of the road, we blocked his access to his property. This was wrong, disrespectful, and caused significant hardship to Mr. Bradley. We should have researched property ownership before making decisions that affected others outside our community. Another pause. Tom could see several residents nodding in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable, realizing perhaps for the first time the full scope of what their HOA board had done. The previous board's actions forced Mr. Bradley to take legal action to defend his property rights, Robert read. His response, while controversial, was legally justified. This situation could have been avoided entirely if the board had done proper due diligence and treated our neighbor with respect. Robert looked up from the paper. On behalf of the Prairie View Estates Homeowners Association, we formally apologize to Tom Bradley for the actions of the previous board. We commit to maintaining a respectful relationship with Mr. Bradley going forward and to ensuring that all future decisions take into account the rights and needs of our neighbors. The room erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped, but most did. Tom nodded, acknowledging the apology but not getting emotional about it. This wasn't about victory or vindication. It was about setting things right. Robert wasn't finished. The board has reached a settlement agreement with Mr. Bradley. The HOA has purchased a permanent easement for the access road. The terms are favorable to both parties. The toll booth will be removed, and the gate that caused this dispute has already been dismantled. All residents now have legal, unobstructed access to their homes. More applause, this time louder and more enthusiastic. People were clearly relieved that the nightmare was over. No more tolls. No more controversy. No more national news crews showing up to interview neighbors about their troubled HOA. Robert invited Tom to speak if he wanted to. Tom stood up slowly, feeling the weight of all those eyes on him. Public speaking wasn't his thing, but he had a few words he needed to say. I appreciate the apology, Tom began, his voice steady but not loud. This whole situation got out of hand, and I know it caused problems for a lot of you. I want you to know I don't have any hard feelings toward the residents of this community. Most of you are good people who just wanted a nice place to live. He paused, looking directly at Beverly. She was staring at her hands, refusing to meet his gaze. What happened here is a lesson about assumptions, Tom continued. The previous board assumed they had rights to something they didn't own. They assumed I'd just accept whatever they decided. They assumed a rancher wouldn't know how to fight back. All of those assumptions were wrong. A few people chuckled nervously. Tom almost smiled but kept his expression serious. I've lived on that ranch my whole life. My grandfather built that road with his own hands. My father maintained it for 40 years. It means something to my family. You can't just take something that means that much and expect people to roll over. Tom gestured toward Robert. Your new board did something the old one couldn't. They listened. They admitted mistakes. They negotiated in good faith. That's how neighbors should treat each other, with respect and communication. He sat down to solid applause. Pete patted him on the back. Richard gave him a thumbs up. Even some of the people who'd been hostile, when he walked in, seemed to have softened. The meeting continued with questions from residents. Someone asked if the road would be repaved now that the HOA was responsible for maintenance. Robert said yes, it was already scheduled. Another person asked if there would be any restrictions on the road going forward. Robert explained that the easement agreement prevented the HOA from ever installing gates or barriers again. One woman stood up, clearly emotional. "I just want to say I'm ashamed of how Mr. Bradley was treated. I moved here 2 years ago, and I had no idea about any of this. But what the board did was wrong, and I'm glad we're making it right." Several other residents echoed her sentiment. The mood in the room had shifted from tense to almost celebratory. People were ready to move on from the controversy and get back to normal life. Beverly finally stood up to leave, trying to slip out quietly. But Robert stopped her. "Beverly, before you go, do you have anything you'd like to say?" She turned, her face a mixture of anger and embarrassment. For a moment, Tom thought she might storm out without speaking. But then she took a deep breath. "I made mistakes," she said, her voice barely audible. "I thought I was protecting property values and community safety. I didn't properly research the road ownership. I should have talked to Tom before making decisions that affected him. I'm sorry." It wasn't the most gracious apology Tom had ever heard, but it was something. He nodded to acknowledge it, and Beverly left quickly, probably for the last time as an HOA board member. After the meeting ended, several residents came up to Tom to introduce themselves. Linda, the woman who called to apologize earlier, invited him to a community barbecue the following month. A retired couple wanted advice on dealing with gophers in their yard. A young father asked if his kids could visit the ranch sometime to see the cattle. Tom found himself surprised by how friendly everyone was once the conflict was resolved. These weren't his enemies. They were just people trying to live their lives, caught in the middle of a dispute they didn't create. As Tom and Pete walked to the truck, Pete couldn't stop grinning. "Man, that was something. Did you see Beverly's face when she had to apologize?" "I saw it," Tom said. "But I didn't enjoy it as much as you might think. This whole thing was exhausting." "But you won," Pete said. "You beat an HOA? That's like beating City Hall. People dream about doing what you did." Tom climbed into his truck, Rex waiting patiently in the passenger seat. "I didn't do it to win, Pete. I did it because they were wrong." "There's a difference." Driving home that night, past the spot where the toll booth had stood just hours before, Tom felt the tension finally leaving his shoulders. The check was in his bank account. The apology was on record. The road was officially his, with a legal easement that protected both his rights and the community's access. He thought about what he'd do with the settlement money. A new tractor would be nice. The barn roof needed replacing. Maybe he'd finally get that breeding bull he'd had his eye on. The possibilities made him smile, but more than the money, Tom valued the principle. He'd stood up for his property rights and his family's legacy. He hadn't let himself be pushed around or intimidated. And in the end, he'd forced people to treat him with the respect he deserved. When Tom pulled up to his ranch house, the stars were out in full force, bright and clear in the country sky. He let Rex out and stood there for a moment, breathing in the familiar smells of grass and cattle and home. This was his land, his life, his legacy. And nobody, not even an HOA with fancy gates and big plans, could take that away from him. He went inside, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat at his kitchen table with his grandfather's old photo album. There was a picture of the road being built, his grandfather on that bulldozer, a huge grin on his dusty face. Tom wondered what the old man would think of everything that had happened. Probably, he decided, his grandfather would have done the exact same thing. Life settled back into its normal rhythm over the following weeks. The toll booth was dismantled and hauled away, leaving only a patch of dirt where it had stood. The HOA scheduled road repairs like they'd promised, bringing in a paving crew to fix the sections that had been damaged by construction traffic years ago. Tom coordinated with Robert to make sure the work didn't interfere with his cattle operations, and everything went smoothly. The national media attention faded as quickly as it had appeared. One week Tom was getting calls from news producers in New York and Los Angeles, and the next week his phone was quiet again. The story had served its purpose, giving other people ammunition in their own fights against overreaching HOAs. And then it moved on to become yesterday's news, but locally the story lingered. People in town recognized Tom now. The feed store owner asked him to autograph a newspaper clipping to hang on the wall. The waitress at his favorite diner insisted his coffee was on the house. Even the sheriff, who Tom had known for years, gave him a friendly ribbing about becoming a celebrity. "Never thought I'd see the day when Tom Bradley made the national news," the sheriff said one afternoon when they crossed paths at the hardware store. "You thinking about running for office now?" Tom laughed. "Not a chance. I'll stick to ranching, thanks." The settlement money made a real difference. Tom bought a newer tractor that didn't break down every other week. He replaced the barn roof before winter, which meant his hay would stay dry for the first time in years. And he finally purchased that breeding bull he'd been eyeing, a beautiful Angus that would improve his herd genetics significantly, but the best use of the money, Tom decided, was something his father and father would have appreciated. He hired a local contractor to build a proper entrance to his ranch. Nothing fancy, just 2 sturdy posts with a sign that read, "Bradley Ranch Est, 1962, and a cattle guard that let vehicles through but kept the herd contained. It was a marker of permanence, a statement that the Bradley family wasn't going anywhere. The relationship with Prairie View Estates evolved in unexpected ways. The community barbecue Linda had invited him to turned out to be fun. Tom brought some of his own beef, properly aged and delicious, which became the hit of the event. He met more of his neighbors and found most of them to be perfectly decent people who shared his interest in living peacefully. Few families started a tradition of weekend visits to the ranch. Tom would give tours, showing kids how a working ranch operated, letting them feed the calves and explaining what cowboys actually did versus what movies showed. He found he enjoyed teaching, sharing knowledge that his father and grandfather had passed down to him. One Saturday morning, a couple from Prairie View Estates knocked on Tom's door. The husband, David, was a software engineer who'd grown up in suburbs and had never been around livestock. His wife, Jennifer, was a teacher who wanted their 2 young daughters to experience country life. "We were wondering," David said nervously, "if maybe our girls could volunteer here sometimes, just to learn about ranching and help out. We'd pay you, of course." Tom waved off the money talk. "I don't need payment, but if they want to learn, I'm happy to teach. Just know that ranch work is real work. It's not all cute calves and horseback riding. There's fence mending, manure shoveling, and early mornings." The girls, ages 8 and 10, nodded eagerly. They showed up the next weekend in brand new boots that Tom knew would be covered in mud within an hour. He put them to work helping him check water troughs and distribute feed. They loved every minute of it. Over the summer, more kids from the development started showing up. Tom found himself running an informal ranch education program without really meaning to. He taught them about animal care, land management, and the kind of practical skills that most suburban kids never learned. Some of them stuck with it, showing up weekend after weekend. A few lost interest after realizing how much actual work was involved. Robert, the new HOA president, became something close to a friend. He'd stop by occasionally to check on the road maintenance or just to chat. Robert had grown up in rural Michigan before his engineering career took him to cities, and he missed country life. He and Tom would sit on the porch, drinking coffee and talking about everything from cattle prices to local politics. "You know," Robert said one evening, "what happened with that gate was the best thing that could have happened to our community." "I know that sounds crazy, but it's true." Tom raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "It exposed problems we didn't know we had. Beverly was making decisions without proper oversight. The board wasn't doing due diligence. Residents weren't paying attention to what was happening. Your fight forced everyone to wake up and take responsibility." Tom considered that. "Still would have been easier if you folks had just asked me about the road in the first place." "Absolutely," Robert agreed. But humans don't usually learn easy lessons. We need to make mistakes and face consequences. You made sure we faced those consequences. Beverly disappeared from community life entirely. She sold her house 3 months after the settlement and moved back to Dallas. Tom heard through the grapevine that she couldn't handle the embarrassment of how everything had played out. He felt a tiny bit of sympathy for her, though not much. She'd created her own problems through arrogance and unwillingness to listen. The story took on a life of its own online. It became a case study in property law classes at the state university. A law blog wrote a detailed analysis of the legal principles involved. Tom even received a letter from a man in Oregon who'd been inspired by Tom's story to fight his own HOA dispute. The man won his case and sent Tom a bottle of wine as thanks. Pete never let Tom forget about the whole thing. Whenever they went to town together, Pete would introduce Tom as the guy who charged an HOA tolls on his own road. It embarrassed Tom every time. But Pete thought it was hilarious. "You're a legend," Pete would say. "Own it." As fall approached and Tom prepared for winter, he reflected on everything that had happened. The conflict with the HOA had disrupted his life, cost him time and emotional energy, and forced him into a spotlight he never wanted. But it had also reinforced important lessons about standing up for what's right, knowing your property rights, and not backing down from people who think they can push you around. One October afternoon, Tom was fixing a section of fence when a car pulled up. A young couple got out looking nervous. The man introduced himself as Ryan and his wife was Amanda. They were considering buying a house in Prairie View Estates. "We heard about what happened with the toll road," Ryan said. "The real estate agent tried to downplay it, but we did our research. We wanted to hear your side of the story before we made an offer." Tom appreciated their due diligence. He gave them the honest version of events, neither sugarcoating the conflict nor exaggerating his role. He explained how things had been resolved and how the community had learned from the experience. "So you're okay with the development now?" Amanda asked. "I'm okay with the people who live there," Tom said. "Most of them are good neighbors. The ones who aren't don't last long. Community has a way of sorting itself out." They thanked him and left. Tom never found out if they bought the house, but he hoped they did. New families with realistic expectations would be good for Prairie View Estates. As winter set in, Tom sat in his warm ranch house one evening, Rex sleeping at his feet, and thought about his grandfather again. The old man had built this ranch through hard work and determination. He'd built that road the same way, one load of gravel at a time. He probably never imagined that 60 years later, his grandson would be fighting an HOA over that same road. But he'd have been proud, Tom thought. Proud that his grandson didn't back down. Proud that the Bradley family name still meant something. Proud that the ranch was still standing, still working. Still home, Tom's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. The community was planning a Christmas lights contest and wanted to know if Tom would be one of the judges. He smiled and typed back a yes. That's what good neighbors did. They moved past conflicts and found ways to build something better. The ranch would be here long after Tom was gone, just like it had been here long after his grandfather passed. Some things were worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth standing up for no matter how difficult it got. Property wasn't just about deeds and surveys and legal documents. It was about legacy, family, and the simple right to live your life on your own terms. Tom turned off the lights and headed to bed. Tomorrow would bring the usual ranch work, the never-ending cycle of caring for animals and land. There might be new challenges, new problems to solve, new neighbors to meet. But whatever came, Tom knew he could handle it. He'd proven that much to himself, to the HOA, and to anyone else who might doubt him. The Bradley Ranch would endure. The road his grandfather built would remain. And Tom would keep doing what Bradleys had always done, working hard, treating people fairly, and standing their ground when it mattered. Some stories don't end with perfect resolution or everyone becoming best friends. Real life is messier than that. But this story ended with respect, understanding, and a community that learned an important lesson about assumptions and consequences. That was enough for Tom. It was more than enough. He fell asleep that night listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, wind rustling through the trees, Rex snoring softly. These were the sounds of home, unchanged by HOA disputes or national media attention or toll booths. The ranch remained constant, solid, real. And in the morning, Tom would wake up, brew his too-strong coffee, and head out to check on his herd. Because that's what ranchers do. They keep going, day after day, doing the work that needs doing. Everything else, all the drama and conflict and resolution, was just noise. The work was what mattered. The land was what lasted. The road his grandfather built was still there, still serving its purpose, still connecting the Bradley Ranch to the world beyond. And now, thanks to a legal easement and hard-won respect, it always would be.